Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good evening and welcome. My name is Mary Ann Barnes. I am the chapter chair for the Cleveland Heights, University Heights chapter of the Greater Cleveland League of Women Voters. And it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator tonight, Catherine LaCroix. Catherine is an adjunct professor at Case Western Reserve University Law School, where her teaching has included courses on environmental law, land use law, and federal court jurisdiction. Her professional life began in Washington, D.C., where she worked on the staff of Iowa Senators Dick Clark and John Culver. After law school and a clerkship with the Honorable Stephen Breyer, who was then a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit in Boston, she returned to Washington and practiced law as an associate and then as a partner with Hogan and Hartson, LLP, now Hogan Lovels, LLP, where her practice focused on environmental health and safety regulations. In the past 2 years, Catherine became active in the League of Women Voters as she energetically spearheaded the League's local efforts towards collecting signatures for redistricting reform. So through this effort, Catherine has added redistricting and gerrymandering as another piece of her expertise in her profile. In the next few weeks, she will be the incoming co-president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. So, Catherine, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our panelists.
Okay. Thank you, Mary Ann, and welcome everybody to what should be a wonderful and extremely informative forum. Now, unlike most moderators, I'm going to spend a certain amount of time at the beginning talking in an educational capacity. So what we're going to do today is first, I'm going to walk us through these diagrams that are sitting on your chairs so that we can understand the judicial system of our area a little better. And then we will listen and learn from the expertise of our panelists here. So let me first introduce our panelists and then beg your indulgence with a little educational content on the chart. So first, starting from my left, Deborah Coleman is a Cleveland attorney and community volunteer. She handled business and technology litigation with the firm of Hahn, Lozier & Parks for 37 years. She retired from that firm and has been in practice for herself. Importantly, Deborah is co-founder of the Judicial Candidates Rating Coalition, a coalition of 5 bar associations that rates the judicial candidates in every contested election on the Cuyahoga County ballots. She's also been a voter registration volunteer with NOVA and an election protection volunteer in many elections. So we welcome Deborah Coleman. To her left, Judge C. Ellen Connally served as a law clerk at the 8th District Court of Appeals and a magistrate of the Cuyahoga County Probate Court before she was elected to the Cleveland Municipal Court in 1980, where she served until 2004. She holds a Bachelor of Science from Bowling Green State University, a JD, and a Master's from Cleveland State University, and is all but dissertation for a PhD in history from the University of Akron. And so since we are hoping for the best for her success there. In 2010, she was elected to the Cuyahoga County Council and was elected the first president of the council. So she brings a unique perspective to us tonight, having been both a judge and an elected county council member. She is on so many boards and has so many honors that unfortunately I hope you don't mind. I can't read them all. Okay. Now, moving on, Judge J.J. Costello is a judge of the Cleveland Heights Municipal Court, lifelong Cleveland Heights resident. He and his wife, Alicia, are proudly raising 2 sons in Cleveland Heights. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Miami of Ohio, his Juris Doctor degree from Case Western Reserve School of Law. After he was admitted to practice in Ohio, he opened up his own law practice in Cleveland Heights, and then after that joined with Powers, Freeman, Lynn, PLL. He took to the bench as a judge on January 1st, 2018. So he's a relatively recent recruit to our esteemed bench. He also served before that as an acting judge of the Cleveland Heights Municipal Court. He's previously served as a member of the Cleveland Heights Cable Television Commission, the Recreation Advisory Board, and Civil Service Commission, and as a graduate of the Cleveland Heights Citizen Police Academy. So he has an extensive public repertoire in Cleveland Heights. And last but by no means least, Judge Robert McClelland has been on the bench of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas since 2011. He presides over criminal and civil cases. Before he took the bench, he was engaged in private practice for 31 years, focusing primarily on civil cases from the defense side, including wrongful death, personal injury, workers' compensation, municipal law, construction law, and products liability. In private practice, he was the trial counselor on over 150 jury trials. Prior to practicing law, he was a high school teacher of speech, English, and drama, which was a wonderful preparation for his career, I'm sure. All right, so what we're doing today is we are learning about the importance of local judicial elections. We're learning how to elect good judges. We're trying to get a sense of what a good judge is. And we're learning about the wonderful tool of Judge for Yourself, which helps us evaluate judges. So first, though, let's look at this chart, because when you go to the polls and you open up your ballot and you're done with the candidates that you recognize, there's this long list of judges, and you say, what is the role of these judges? Who are they? What am I electing them to? So we're going to run through this chart. I want to start at the bottom and move our way up. Mayor's courts are not part of this forum, okay? The mayor's courts are not part of the judicial branch of Ohio government. They are not courts of record, which means their proceedings are not recorded or transcribed. Ohio and Louisiana are the only two states that allow mayors of municipal corporations to preside over a court. They're not required to be lawyers, but they may appoint an attorney with 3 years of experience to hear cases. They hear cases on violations of local ordinances and state traffic laws. Importantly, for our perspective, a person convicted in a mayor's court may appeal the conviction to the municipal or county court having jurisdiction over that mayor's city. So we've provided, for your background, a piece on mayor's courts provided by the ACLU. It gives some information about them. It gives information about recent ACLU research into mayor's courts. I want to emphasize the League of Women Voters has not taken a position for or against mayor's courts, but since they're on our little chart, I thought it was worthwhile to explain them so that you understood what they are. But of course, we're not talking about mayor's courts at this forum. Going up this chain here with the little dotted line leads us to municipal and county courts. These courts have jurisdiction over at the municipal level. So a municipal court may have jurisdiction over one or more municipalities. The Shaker Heights judge, for instance, also hears cases that arise in Beechwood. County courts are needed if an area of a county is not served by a municipal court. So your city will have a municipal judge, but if your city doesn't have a municipal judge, it will have a county judge that serves that same function. Municipal and county courts may hear civil cases if the money in dispute is less than $15,000. Anything higher than that goes to the Court of Common Pleas. They conduct preliminary hearings in felony cases. They can hear traffic and non-traffic criminal misdemeanors, and the judges may also perform marriages. So they are elected to 6-year terms, and they must have been attorneys with 6 years of experience in the practice of law before they're elected. Now, the big box above that, courts of common pleas, are important courts. It's a trial court level that is created by the Ohio Constitution. There's a court of common pleas in each of our 88 counties of our state. And as you can see, they may be divided into separate divisions. The general division, civil and criminal cases, the domestic relations, juvenile, and probate divisions. So the general division, which we'll hear about today, here's criminal felony cases and all civil cases where the amount at issue is more than $15,000. Okay, so that's the jurisdiction of the courts of common pleas. So the municipal and county courts and the courts of common pleas are trial courts. They hear trials, they take facts, they hear from witnesses, they make a decision in the first instance. Appeals from these go up to the next box, the Court of Appeals. So we have in Ohio, our courts of appeals are divided into 12 geographic divisions, much like when you see maps for congressional districts. We have 12 geographical divisions for our courts of appeals. And these courts of appeals, if you follow the lines in our diagram, here appeals from the common pleas court and from the municipal and county courts. So each case is heard there and decided by a 3-judge panel. Moving on up to the top box, the Supreme Court of Ohio is the court of last resort in Ohio. So it consists of a Chief Justice and 6 additional justices. It hears appeals from the courts of appeals. It also sets rules of practice for the courts of Ohio, and it has authority over admission of and discipline of attorneys who practice law in Ohio. So all of these, in the Court of Claims, there's a little box there next to municipal and county. It's a specialized court that we won't be discussing tonight. It hears civil claims against the state of Ohio or its agencies and some other matters. So we do not, as far as I know, separately elect these judges. So, in general, state court judges, all of the judges that I've just described, are elected through partisan primaries and nonpartisan general elections. All judges serve 6-year terms and must run for re-election. The Supreme Court judges appear on the ballot statewide. The Court of Appeals judges are on the ballot in the area within their jurisdiction. So you would see a different slate of Court of Appeals judges up here in Cleveland than they would see down in Columbus, for instance. Common pleas and municipal and county court candidates will appear on the ballot if you're within their jurisdiction, within the county, within the municipality. Okay, so with that brief introduction to our system, I would like to turn to our panelists. So I would like to ask them a few questions just to get us started, and then there will be an opportunity for questions from the floor. And if you have a little note card in your hand, Roz is available in the back there. If you want a note card and want to ask a question, you can write it down, hand it to her, and we will be able to ask questions during the Q&A part of this session. All right. So after that diagram, I think it's appropriate to start on my far left with Judge McClelland.
Of course.
And ask, I've given this rather dry summary of our court system. Do you have anything to add to what I said? Any additions, corrections, explications?
I mean, the one's minor. That is, any amount of money in a civil case can come in front of the common pleas court. And often, just out of ease, lawyers that are downtown will file even a $5,000 case or less rather than run out to a municipality just out of convenience. So there's no limit. From zero to anything can be the amount in a civil case.
Okay, thank you. That's a wonderful clarification. So maybe you can explain then, in your docket, typically, a typical day of your docket, what sort of case do you see?
Well, there's nothing really very typical about it. The amount of cases can vary from judge to judge depending on how you process your cases. I take my time on cases. I'm not trying to rush cases through real quickly, so my docket might actually be a higher number than somebody else. Currently, I have about 140 active criminal cases on my docket, another about the same number of civil cases, and then about 150 foreclosure cases. And I would say that there's 34 of us, we're in the general division. Because of the size of our county, we do have separate divisions. There are still 7 counties in Ohio that have a single common pleas judge who handles general, domestic, juvenile, and probate. But here you would have elections where you'd vote for people for each of those separate divisions. There are 34 general division judges. One of my colleagues has joined us, Maureen Clancy, who's sitting back there, who beat the devil out of me in an election, by the way. No hard feelings. But no, but because there's 34 of us and the volume of cases, we're the largest common pleas court in Ohio. The next closest, I think, is Franklin County with 17 general division judges. Any given day, most Mondays and Wednesdays, I have anywhere from 3 to 5 cases set for trial. Many times, not a single case goes forward. They either settle the morning of trial or a plea is entered into. I was in trial starting yesterday on a human trafficking case. We completed getting the jury seated at noon today, and when they left the room, the defendant decided to take the plea offer that he had, and so we concluded the case at that time. So any of those kinds of things can happen. And in terms of the cases we get, it's pure random selection. You can kind of think of it like the roulette wheel. When somebody comes in and files a case or an indictment is charged by the prosecutor's office, it goes into the clerk's office, and then those cases are randomly assigned to us. There's some algorithm in the computer that makes it happen so that each of us basically get the same number of cases over time. But I have no control over whose case might come in front of me, the kind of case that comes in front of me. So we just, whatever comes up on our docket, that's what we get and deal with. In terms of the civil cases, it can run the gamut from a collection case, a car accident case, a medical malpractice, some sort of real estate matter, contract matter, wrongful death, employment cases, so the whole myriad of civil kind of cases. And then, of course, on the criminal side, it's any criminal felony violation, not misdemeanor. So, for example, you wouldn't see a shoplifting typically unless it's over $1,000. Then it goes to the felony level. But you're going to see the horrible stuff, the murders, the rapes, some drug cases obviously be coming through, felonious assault. We even see some gambling cases out of the casino that are kind of interesting. They have cameras everywhere. Again, and in terms of what you get as far as what kind of case, again, we have no control. You may suddenly see you've got 5 or 6 murder cases, unfortunately, or you may have several domestic violence cases, but there's nothing controls who gets which kind of a case. So there really isn't an average day. I am active in my civil cases and handle my own pretrials if I'm not in trial. We're very fortunate to have staff attorneys to assist us on the civil cases, and most of us use our bailiffs to assist us with the criminal cases. So it's interesting. Some days you're crazy busy, and other days it gets real quiet. And because we really have no control over people's decisions about whether they're going to resolve their case or not at any given time. So it's kind of an uncontrollable schedule. And because we have so many of us, the lawyers are running from courtroom to courtroom, and you got to be pretty understanding about their time and when they're going to be accessible to you to get something done. It's interesting. It's a fabulous job. After 31 years in private practice, it was a really nice transition for me. Fabulous. We have a great legal community, great people that come before us, and it's a very interesting job. A lot of things I never saw myself in private practice. After, you think after 31 years and 150 plus jury trials, you'd think, well, you kind of done all those things. There's still lots of things I learn on a daily basis. And the hardest part of the job for me is sentencing people. It's a very difficult part of the job, and not a pleasant part of the job, but something that goes with the territory.
Thank you. That's a wonderful rundown. Actually, I was thinking to ask you what surprised you most in your transition from being a practicing attorney to being a judge in terms of...
2 things.
Yeah, okay.
The first one was how collegial the judges are with each other, and that the politics fades. Nobody cares what party you're in or anything else. We'd all like each of us to do a really good job and be well respected in the community. And the second one was how collegial the criminal defense lawyers and the prosecutors are. I thought they'd beat each other's throats, but they really work well together. I mean, there's some people that have some baggage and history with each other and can get kind of mean and nasty. But generally, they are really work well together, very collegial as well.
Okay, thank you. And how important do you think your prior trial experience was to helping you be a good judge?
I don't think you can discount it at all. I mean, it's really helpful. I can't imagine, you only have to be a lawyer for 6 years and breathing to be a judge. You don't have to have ever had a trial in your life. You never have to have represented a client. And I can't understand somebody wanting to be a trial judge if you didn't do trial work in the first place. I mean, your joke was correct about the teaching I did. Obviously not very shy, like being in front of people, so I was a natural for courtroom work. And I liked being in trial. I still enjoy being in trial, except I have to bite my tongue every so often of things I want to say or make objections that are not me to make the objection. I did that in my first trial. I objected from the bench, and they all looked at they all looked at me and said, "I guess that's sustained." But I guess the comparison analogy I would make is, if you got to have heart surgery, do you want, I mean, the new young guys are probably really amazing and knowledgeable, but is that who you want putting the knife on you? Or do you want somebody with a little bit more experience? And I think the same thing's true here. Not that people can't do the job, but a little bit of experience, get beat up in a courtroom a few times. I mean, I didn't win all my cases. I wish I could tell you that. It's really important to have been there, to have kind of walked down that path, to had a client who's mad at you, a client that says, "I can't believe you're going to make me plead to that charge," or "You're recommending that I do that," or "We ought to take that amount in settlement." I mean, it really helps a lot to have that kind of background and experience, like in any other profession, I think.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Judge Costello, if you want to, do you have anything to add to my description, which was very short, the thumbnail sketch of what happens speaking as a municipal court judge then for Cleveland Heights?
Sure, just a few things. I mean, first, so the municipal courts in Ohio are a creature of statute. So our representatives, state representatives, that have created these courts, and so that's why the jurisdiction is as it is. It's limited jurisdiction. So the one thing that's not mentioned on this that I do hear are on the felony levels is the initial appearance and potentially. So any time a felon is arrested, they come into the Cleveland Heights court, and I need to make sure that they understand their basic rights, apprise them of the charges against them and the possible penalties, and then potentially they're entitled, or they can make a demand for a preliminary hearing, which would be a hearing in which I need to make a determination of whether there is in fact probable cause to hold that defendant. And so I'm setting, basically at those cases, I'm setting a bond, which has obviously been a big discussion of in Ohio and elsewhere in terms of how we should, what types of bonds we should have, and whether there should be cash bonds. And so in addition to the misdemeanor cases, criminal cases, I'm also hearing the felony cases at that initial stage as well.
Okay, so in terms of your role, would you say that the role you play is pretty close to the lives of many Cleveland Heights residents?
Yes, and so the stuff that I hear, I mean, if anyone has ever been in a court, the chances are is that you've probably been in a municipal court. For every speeding ticket or things of that nature, or I hear those cases. It's the cases where if your contractor didn't do the bathroom the right way, as long as the damage was under $15,000, you're likely going to be in my court. And so as a result, what happens, especially on those civil cases, is oftentimes there are one or both sides are not represented by counsel, and that presents some unique, I wouldn't say difficulties, but some unique instances for myself as a judge, right? So Judge McClelland mentioned objecting in the middle of a trial. I have to find the balance of when, especially on small claims actions and these civil actions, when you've got one or both sides that are not represented by counsel, sort of without being their attorney, right? That's certainly not my role, but trying to push them in the right direction so that the case. I'm sorry. So that the case doesn't go on. Can everybody hear me okay? I apologize. So that the case, I mean, it's very easy, as you might imagine, when you've got two individuals in small claims court fighting over everything from who should get their dog after they've broken up to a broken, a tree or something, and whatever it is. As you can imagine, it can meander all over the place. And so my job is to sort of try to keep them in line and without also being their attorney. And it's dealing with the day-to-day lives of stuff. My description of a municipal court sometimes, to give people an example of sort of the stuff or the way that I look at it, because of the volume that we do, there's close to somewhere around 15,000 cases that are filed in Cleveland Heights on an annual basis, both civil actions and criminal actions. I'm a single judge court, so I have my hands in all of those cases. And so I sort of think of the municipal court as sort of this people's court, but really as sort of like the emergency room, right? So people are coming into us and they're dealing with this stuff, and some of these times I gotta move things through quickly without hampering justice. And then you get to some of these other courts that sort of are specialized or can deal and spend a little more time on things as should be the case.
So in terms of the difference between your role and the role of the judge of the Court of Common Pleas, we heard that a trial experience is extremely important in the Court of Common Pleas because it's essentially a trial court. But what you're saying is your role includes another whole set of skills.
I think this is true for most judges. In addition,
Okay.
I think that it's important to have that trial experience. My trial experience was as a private attorney was almost entirely at the municipal level. My practice was uniquely almost entirely at the municipal level, and so I had that experience coming into it, as well as being an acting judge, and so having some experience is what it meant to be on the bench. I think that's critical. I do think that like the judge said, the idea of potentially trying to get into a trial level court, which includes the municipal courts. I have plenty of trials on it, as well. To not have some of that experience would be a severe impediment. The other thing is there's some social work aspects, especially to my type of stuff that I deal with. There's a great number of domestic violence cases and things like that where there requires a bit of that almost social work type thing. And the last part that I would mention, it's especially true, it's true of municipal courts, but especially single judge municipal courts, is there's this entire administrative side of things that oftentimes and almost entirely gets glossed over during the election period. And so when you think of my day, I spend half of it out on the bench trying cases, doing arraignments, whatever the case may be, and the other half I'm ruling on motions, but I'm also dealing with all the administrative stuff. I have a staff of roughly 25 people, probation officers, clerks, as well as my bailiffs. And I basically became the CEO on day one of this organization. And so I do a lot of that administrative stuff and employment stuff and everything else while I'm not on the bench. So it's something else that budgetary stuff, all that stuff comes into play as well.
Okay, so being a judge for you also involves a fair amount of administrative management skill. All right, thanks. Now, Judge Connally has had a wide career, a retired municipal court judge, and as I mentioned, the first president of the county council, Cuyahoga County Council, under our new form of government. So first, you are now retired. These other gentlemen are on the bench. So as a retired judge, what perspective may you have gained about judicial elections that you might want to share with us?
Well, I have a couple of points I've been making since they've been talking. First of all, I would say that the municipal court is the most important court of all the courts because it's the court where most people go. So if the perception of justice is poor at the municipal level, it kind of applies because people say, oh, she's a judge. They don't know if you're on the Supreme Court or, on the Common Pleas Court. So you have to remember that these people maybe that's their only experience on the court. And I know Judge Leo Jackson, who was on the Court of Appeals, he would say, oh, I have all these weighty decisions. So you have a judge, you can take 2 or 3 months to decide. I got to decide instantaneous, so it's a lot different. Because as you say, it's a lot of many rapid decisions as opposed to an appellate judge who can, take a lot of time to decide. You should remember that the county elections for the Common Pleas Court judges, the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, those are on even years. So you could be running on a presidential year or with other statewide candidates. And then the municipal court judges run on the odd years. So you would run like with the mayor of your city. In Cleveland Municipal Court, there's no partisan primary. Anybody who files a sufficient number of signatures. Now, when I ran, you had to get 1,000 good signatures. Now I think it's down to 150 or something. I mean, it was hard to get those signatures, just to get on the ballot. And so you could have as many as 5 or 6 people running for the same spot, and whoever is the top vote getter. So it changes your election because you only need to get so many out of the, you just got to get one more than all the rest of the people. And I found when I was on the Cleveland Municipal Court that although there were large cases, the case was maybe worth realistically $10,000, $12,000, they would file, or maybe even more, they would file it in the municipal court because they could get a jury trial quicker in the municipal court than in the common pleas court. So, my experience was I had been a magistrate at the probate court for about 8 years. And so I had that experience. And I actually used to say that I lost jurisdiction when I was at the probate court. I was handling like all these trusts worth, millions of dollars and big estates and stuff. And I went to municipal court and I was down to $15,000. But I think that Judge Costello is correct that sometimes municipal court judges, you kind of end up almost as a social worker, particularly in domestic violence cases. I remember I remember it was like, the week before Christmas, and the husband and wife were fighting, and the husband wanted to take the children, like him and his mother were there, and they wanted to take the kids for Christmas Eve, and she wasn't letting them go. And I was like, I'm not a domestic relations judge, but, lady, this guy's and his mother going to take your kids and buy them gifts and be nice to them, like, for Christmas, and you don't want them to go? So they finally worked it out, but yeah. But municipal court judges have, all kinds of, I was always the judge that the prosecutors were always pleading if there was an animal abuse case that the case would go to me. I one time had somebody that took a felony judge rather than going before me on an animal abuse case because they knew they were going to get the max. I tend not to be very fair when you abuse animals. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience. I think that one of the reasons I retired was it became repetitive. We had so many of the same cases, so many driving while suspensions. From the time when I first got elected, there was no such thing as domestic violence. That was created because I became a judge. And I noticed that when I first became a judge, we would have very few women with driving while under the influence of alcohol. Out of 10 cases, you might get one woman. By the time I left, you were getting more and more women with drinking and driving. So I don't know if they weren't drinking at home or they didn't get arrested or what. And now I am a retired judge, but I do not sit by assignment. So if you are a judge and you still continue to sit as a visiting judge, you have all the same rules as a judge. So you can't make political statements and you can't do all that kind of stuff. But I retired and I do not sit by assignment, so I can write columns for Cool Cleveland and make political statements. But it was a great experience. While I was there for 24 years, I loved it, and I think that, as I say, municipal court is a very, very important part of the judicial system.
Thank you. Now, that's a wonderful segue to my point, because you retired from the municipal court
Right.
and then moved on to county council.
Right.
So consider a proposition. Electing judges is different from electing a person to a political office, correct? And
No, you're
could
still
you-
out there asking people for votes. I mean,
okay,
yeah.
all right.
And one of the things I found
Fair
that,
enough.
you're there and you're saying, I'm Ellen Connally and I'm running for judge, or I'm running for, I think, Judge Clancy, Judge Walker, saying, you're saying you're there, and people are rude to you, I don't want to talk to you, or they don't, they're not concerned. And you're saying, I'm here and I'm trying to tell you, that about my candidacy and, or give you some information. And people and then, of course, when they have a case, then they want to know about the judges, but then you're there and you're trying to present yourself, or you go to a forum, or you go to a ward club or something, and there's 5 other candidates and 2 people or something. So, you drive all the way to Parma, and, you get there and there's you get to be really good friends with the other candidates because you see them all the time. But there's not that many people there. And like I say, I drive all the way to Parma to the Democratic Ward Club. Well, if I don't have those votes already, why am I, you'd better go stand at the supermarket and talk to people, because at least those people probably haven't made up their mind.
Okay, well, I guess what I was kind of asking is, you don't campaign with a platform as a candidate for
No,
judge.
you can talk
Yeah.
about your credentials and what you would like to do as a judge. Now, you should not vote for the person who says, I'm going to lock up everybody. You want somebody who's going to be fair and impartial. You want the person that's going to listen to both sides.
So that's
yeah.
the criteria that we should be looking for in electing a judge, not a political platform, but instead
Their experience, the kind of experience they've had, their kind of their perspective on life,
Okay. So the concept of electing our judges, there's a question has come in, should we vote for judges or not? There are two ways you get to be a judge. One is through an elected system, as we have here. In other states and in other types of courts, the judges are appointed rather than elected. But one of the arguments for electing judges is they are accountable. And I wonder, actually, Judge Connally first, but the others, what is our standard of accountability? What does that mean in the context of judge elections as opposed to other
every once in a while
politicians?
you'll see some of the news where a judge does something that the public really is dissatisfied with, and then at the end of that, at the next election, people shouldn't vote for that person. But I will say this: I ran for office a number of times. And I ran for Common Pleas and Court of Appeals and lost. So, I know about winning and losing. But I was up for an appointment once, and I thought it was, pretty much in the bag, and I ended up not getting it. But there were people calling me like, listen, Connally, I've talked to the governor, it's in the bag. And, it was, to me, the politics of that appointment process was worse than going to the ballot, going to the box, and on election day, you either won or lost, but, you had all these people calling you and maneuvering. So I believe in electing judges.
Okay. Yeah, Judge Costello.
What I was going to say, my hope is that with things like this and with technologies, that the judges are becoming more accountable. I have a sense that in the past, especially, you would have a judge on the bench and have no idea what that judge was doing unless that judge, he or her, made a serious mistake, right? They let somebody out on a low bail, on bail, and that person went out and killed somebody, right? Or they had some serious appeal that got turned over, and people can't believe that they made such a poor decision on the bench. And that's still the case, right? That's still going to make the news, and it's still going to affect how people look at a judge in terms of whether they've made the right or wrong choice, and rightly so. But at least in my court, I get this, and in talking to people, I'm getting the sense that people are looking for, like everything else, are looking for more information immediately, and want to see that stuff. So, as an example of what, as a municipal court judge, every year, I'm required to submit basically an annual report, and that would, for many years, I think judges would put together these annual reports. They have to be submitted to your county authority as well as your local funding, and they would sort of get sent to those two groups, and then no one would ever hear of it. I think now more and more judges, including myself, are posting those online, and so that they're available to the public. And just like anything else, there's going to be members of the public that don't care and that aren't going to pay attention. But there's also plenty of people, like the people that are in this room, that obviously do care and are going to start paying attention to things like that, and getting that information, that additional information that's out there, being able to find out what's happening in the court a little better, and then passing that along to maybe some of the people that only sort of care.
Okay, thank you. Judge McClelland, you want to add
I think it's
anything?
difficult for the public to know about accountability of judges because if you're being fair and you're being consistent, you probably don't hear much about that judge. So maybe the less you hear might be better about the accountability. Judge Costello brings up one of the really tough issues for us on the Common Pleas bench, because we get some violent cases and some people, do you put them out on bond? Do you give them bail? And that's been a hot issue now about not giving people out on bond. And your worst fear is that I make a bad decision because I don't have a crystal ball, and then something horrible does happen. And it pretty much happens to every judge. No matter how good you are, it's going to happen. The variability that's out there, these horrible things that occur. And that sometimes works against a judge, because they may have made the absolute best decision they can, or they get a really high-profile case and they have to make a difficult decision that's not a popular decision. And that goes with the job. It could cost you your job, but you took the oath and you're going to make that decision that's correct and consistent with the law, maybe even one you don't like. You may not like the law yourself, but you got to follow it. So that's where you get into the problem about the accountability, and I think most of the argument about appointed judges, like federal judges who are appointed for life, because, as my mother would say, they are now independent as a hog on ice. They can make the call and not worry about the political ramifications, and you can't do that. In my job, I may realize I may take a hit on this, but I got to make the decision based on the law and the facts. That's the way it goes.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is a wonderful segue to our last speaker, Deborah Coleman, a practicing attorney and co-founder of JudgeForYourself.com, which is the way we have been trying to shed some light on the judicial election candidates. So, Ms. Coleman, would you like to explain how Judge for Yourself works?
I will do that. I want to start with pulling together some of the themes that you've already heard from the judges here. The issue of accountability is a challenging one. I think it's a lot easier in a single judge court, whether that is Judge Costello's court or whether it's the court in Steubenville, where actually I think there are two judges, but let's say there's one, where there's a small community and there's one judge. People are going to find themselves in court as a juror, a witness, a party. They're going to have many, many chances to observe that judge and see whether the judge is exhibiting the characteristics that you want in a judge, someone who is fair, who has a level temperament, who is hardworking and moves cases along, someone who's got the competence to do the job that they've been elected to. The challenge for us in Cuyahoga County is one you've probably already figured out, and that is over a 6-year period, there are 56 positions on the ballot that you have the opportunity, judicial positions that you have the opportunity to vote for. In addition to that, all of you, I think, live in cities in Cuyahoga County, and you have the chance to elect one or more judges in your municipality. So altogether in Cuyahoga County, there are 81, I think, judicial positions on the ballot at one time or another over a 6-year period. How in the world can you possibly do the due diligence that Judge Costello was talking about? It would be nice if you could, but look, we're realistic. We understand that a lot of times when it comes to campaigns, and Judge Connally is absolutely right, judges have to campaign, but people who are running for judge can't say very much about what they're going to do. They're forbidden from taking a position because they've got to decide the case before them based on the law and the facts related to that case. So you're not electing a judge to make policy that you agree with. You're electing a judge to be a fair arbiter of disputes and a fair sentencer when people are convicted of crimes. It's a much more difficult thing. That situation and the keen awareness that judicial officers are more likely to affect your own life, the life of an individual, than any other elected position, whether it's because you're a party, you're on a jury, your child's brought to juvenile court, you've got a boundary dispute with your neighbor, it's going to affect you, and you have the right to vote. How are you going to do it? So a group of bar associations got together in 2001 and said, let's see what we can do to improve the level of information that the public has about the people who are running for judge. The original founding groups included the former Citizens League, and we loved having a community group as part of us, but right now what we've got is 5 bar associations. But I'd say we're pretty good proxies for you in terms of doing due diligence, because among our 5 bar associations, we have lawyers who are in court as defense lawyers, as prosecutors, as civil practitioners representing individuals, in divorce, in juvenile court, in commercial disputes. We have a whole range of lawyers. The 5 bar associations represent collectively the thousands of lawyers who work in the Cuyahoga County courts, among others. And many of them have the opportunity to observe many of the judges over time. And so at this point, the coalition consists of 5 bar associations, and I can list them if you'd like.
Yes, that would be great.
The
And explain
Cleveland,
who they are.
the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, which is a combination of 2 former bar associations, the Cuyahoga County Bar Association and the Cleveland Bar Association, and represents, I think there are 5,000 members of the Cleveland Bar Association. The Norman S. Minor Bar Association, which also is the result of mergers among smaller bar associations, and this bar association is a coming together of African American lawyers. The Ohio Women's Bar Association. It sounds like a statewide organization, and in fact it is, but the committee of that association that consists of women practicing in this county is the group that makes the recommendations concerning judicial candidate ratings for all of the trial courts that we talked about and for the Cuyahoga County Court of Appeals. The statewide organization makes the ratings of the Supreme Court candidates because they're running statewide and all of the members want to have a voice in those evaluations. We have two other bar associations. Our newest member is the Asian American Bar Association, and we also have the Cuyahoga Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, which sounds like they're just defense lawyers, but really they're better described as the practitioners who are representing people all the time, individuals. They're representing them in criminal cases. If they're charged with crime, they're representing them in civil matters, whether it's a house closing or a dispute over a fallen tree or what have you. They are doing the kind of work, frankly, that you're most likely to be needing to be done. Whereas many of the, let's say, the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar members are representing businesses or institutions or government agencies. The Cleveland Bar Association also has some non-lawyer members, and they come from different backgrounds. One of them is a former business executive. Another one is a community activist who's been very active with the GCC, that some of you may be familiar with, the Greater Cleveland Congregations. So we all came together with one primary mission, and that was to educate voters about judicial candidates. Our secondary mission was to share information and to make it easier for the candidates to come talk to the bar associations. I think Judge Connally will bear me out on this. There was a time when the candidates had to go from place to place to place, and so that was 4 or 5 different interviews at 4 or 5 different times and 4 or 5 different questionnaires. And we said, we're going to consolidate all that. We're going to have one questionnaire. We're going to have one interview all together. We're going to ask you questions one by one. We're going to review your answers to the questionnaire. We're going to share the information that those who have worked with you in one capacity or another have had, and each group is going to separately come up with their ratings of the candidates. Those ratings are based on 5 criteria, which we're in the process of simplifying down to 4. So I'm going to talk about the 4 major criteria. One is integrity. The second is professional competence for the position sought. And as you've heard, that may vary. For a judge who's on the Court of Appeals, taking time and writing opinions and making precedent to be followed by other courts, someone with a scholarly background may be more suitable. For someone in the municipal court, you want somebody with people skills, you want somebody with administrative skills, as well as somebody with the trial background that Judge McClelland and Judge Costello were talking about. Diligence. Is this person hardworking, efficient, punctual, well-prepared? That's the 3rd criteria. Temperament and demeanor. Those are words with a lot of syllables. What does it mean? Is this person even-tempered? Fair and impartial? Are they going to hear people out without outbursts or without giving people time within the reasonable time frame to explain themselves? Now, that reasonable time frame is going to vary. In municipal court, it may be only 5 minutes. Judge, 5 minutes too much, Judge Walker? All right. Whatever. It's not going to be long because there are so many cases. But in order to handle all that and keep your wits about you and keep your temper, we're looking for somebody who's got those personal qualities. We invite every candidate in a contested primary or general election that appears on the ballot in this county to come and interview with us. After we go through the interview process, each group gives each candidate a rating. And those ratings are recommended by the people who actually interviewed the candidates. And then each bar association has its own review and approval process, so that the opinion of the entire association is brought to bear on the recommendations that are made. And then they're published. They're published always on our website, judgeforyourself.com, the number 4. And we've been fortunate in the past to have the cooperation of several of the local newspapers to publish or link to the website as well. You'll sometimes see a distribution of flyers in libraries. The libraries have been very cooperative in giving us a chance to put information out. And if you go to the website, you'll see candidate biographies, photographs, the ratings by each organization, and the plain dealer endorsement, as well as a lot of information about the courts and the judicial process. So we have been doing that work since 2002, and we will be doing it again. In August, we'll have our interviews for municipal court, and then we've got two rounds of interviews next year.
Thank you. Are there other counties in our area that have an organization like Judge for Yourself?
Judge for Yourself is fairly unique because it is a coalition. The Summit County Bar, Summit County is where Akron is, does rate judicial candidates. The Ohio Bar Association does rate Supreme Court candidates, but we're not aware of a coalition like ours of multiple bar associations in Ohio. There is an alliance in Chicago of many bar associations which come together. They have a different election process in Illinois, which we can talk about. But those are the only 2 coalitions of which we're aware, ours and the one in Chicago.
Okay. Do you feel at any time, when you see the ratings, do you generally agree with the consensus that has come up from your group? I mean, there's some questions
Do
here.
I agree?
No, well, let me put it this way. I've gotten a number of questions from the audience disagreeing with some of the ratings of some of the judges.
And people are free to. That's why it's called Judge for Yourself.
Okay. All right.
And you may have people who were outvoted on a rating, and when I hope they'll still hand out the ratings to their friends, but they'll say, now, as to this one, I disagree. I'm a member of this bar association. I disagree with what they said. I think she's better than the rating that she got. And that's what people will share with their friends. We're not aiming to be the only voice, but we are the only group of folks in town that is trying to talk to everybody and rate them against the criteria that are essential for judges. Not who they know, not what their name is, not what political party they're in, not what their endorsement is from the paper or from the political party. But do they have integrity? Do they have the competence for the job? Are they diligent? And do they have a good temperament? And do they have the understanding of the community where they want to work that's important to that job, as it will be, for example, for a municipal judge?
Thank you. One quick question from a very interested member of the audience. Do you need any volunteers for the upcoming interviews? If so, would you like someone to talk to you afterwards?
Yes, talk to me afterwards. As I
Okay.
mentioned, the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar has positions for non-attorneys. And all of the bar associations will be looking at their rosters starting with the term of service on July 1st. So whether you're an attorney or not, if you're interested in being part of this, let me know.
Okay. Thank you. Now, for any of our panelists, there have been a couple of questions about the name game. Judge for Yourself does an excellent job of, as you've heard, of trying to organize and offer some ratings. But how can we help voters to avoid succumbing to the name game and just going, I've heard of that name, I'll vote for that person? This has been, I've got a bunch of questions about this. I don't know if there's an answer, but I'm compelled. I think it's important to ask.
Gallagher has replaced Corrigan as the name. There's like, I don't know, there's like 6 Gallaghers or something. And this is a funny story. There was a judge, I won't call his name, but he was very erudite, and he thought this name game was terrible. And he said, this is I went to Harvard, and I'm very brilliant, and people don't they get confused when they go to the ballot. And his opponent's name was Corrigan. And he got up and said, ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Corrigan, and my father came from Ireland, and I've been a lawyer. And when I was on the Bataan Death March, nobody asked my last name. And he sat down. So, it's how people recognize your name. My name is on the ballot as C. Ellen Connally. The next year after I ran, Colleen Conway Cooney ran. And my dad kept saying, people think you're running. And I go no, I'm not running. And people do get the names confused. I mean, it's good and it's bad. It's good for the people that won, but it's bad for the people that, certain names. There was a candidate, and I won't tell his name, but he had a very unusual first name. And I said, hey, go to the Board of Elections, change your first name. You can run with your middle name. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he got beat. So, you have to, it's what you're born with, I guess.
It's an interesting phenomenon in Cuyahoga County. I tried cases in a lot of different counties. In some of the other counties, it's like the League of Nations. I mean, you see all sorts of now you typically see more Italian names in Youngstown on their bench, but there's more variety around the state for some reason. And I'm Scotch-Irish, so I got lucky in Cuyahoga County. That some reason those names seem to fit. I think the way you got to get past that is what I'm said before and what Deborah's talking about with the Judge for Yourself. Look at the credentials. I mean, look at the experience, look at what they've got as far as the background. I've been in front of the Judge for Yourself, I think it's been 4 times, at least 3 times, I know that. I think they've been fair to me. I didn't always get, last couple times I got excellent, but, I think they've been fair to me. I think it's a lot of your peers. It's a very nerve-wracking interview. There's about 60 people in the room, and it's a free-for-all for about 20 minutes. They can all ask you questions, and the questionnaire is not like 5 questions. It looks very much like the questionnaire for a federal magistrate. It's about 14 pages long, and it requires a great deal of information. So it's a pretty rigorous vetting that's done by them. They don't, people think there's certain biases against certain people and positions, and I suppose it could be true, but I don't think you see a huge variance in the ratings. And I think you've got to do that there's other websites available. Ballotpedia has stuff, I think it is. There's a Judgepedia. There's a couple different other websites, the Supreme Court of Ohio. So you've got a lot of sources. It's difficult to take the time and effort when you've got this many people running for judge. And a lot of us joke about, we call it ballot fatigue. If you'll notice, we're at the end of the ballot. And many times when we're campaigning, we'll say, would you please go all the way down to the bottom of the ballot, because that's where I am. I'm dwelling on the bottom. And that's difficult. But I think you have to look more that, like you would any other candidate. You do it the same way if it was somebody running for Congress. So you got to treat the judges the same way, I think. It's a lot of work. And I think the absentee ballot system, this come into effect, and so many more people having it, and the time to vote them. When I was in college and got them, you got the ballot, you voted, and you sent it back right away. Now people can sit with their computer and sit down and go through the candidates that are on that ballot and take a little more time going through it. And I think those are the ways you get past just seeing a name that's familiar and, gee, it looks comfortable to vote for that.
And can I just say something else? Also, you get elected, but you need to start running the day after the election. I mean, you need to go places. You can't just sit at home. You just need to go to, community meetings and things, and there are issues that you can talk about, like, maybe domestic violence or driving under the influence. And so you need to be out and around, and you can't just campaign every 6 years.
That gets us to another question that we've gotten from the audience about fundraising. Do judges have to raise money for elections? How do we avoid conflicts of interest?
So just like just like everybody else that runs, you got to raise money, and that's true for judges as well. There are, however, some additional restrictions on judges and or people who are seeking to be elected as judge. That's put forth by the rules. So as soon as you declare whether you are a judge or as soon as you declare that you're going to run for judge, certain ethics rules apply to you. And for example, I as a judge, unlike a politician who can walk into a room like this and make a specific money ask, I as a judge can't make that money ask. It's prohibited by the rules. So there are, and rightfully so, because and it's like everything. It's a difficult. You've got a line, and it's difficult to find which side it should be on. But it's trying to find a way in which, and I think that the rules do a nice job of that. Recognizing that judges, it's the reality of it is, if you're running for office, there has to be some money. That's the way our system works, right? But on the flip side of that is there are some restrictions in terms of how judges can go about that, so that it doesn't have an undue influence. There's limits, for example, how much an individuals or law firms can contribute, and it goes up as you move up this this chart that you've got. The dollar amounts that any individual can submit to a candidate increases as well. So there's a limit as to when I'm running in terms of how much someone can donate to me, and so all of that I think plays a role in sort of. I'm sorry. And yeah, right. And yeah, that's another good example. So if someone were to come up to me directly while I'm running and say, Judge or JJ, I want to hand you this check. Here you go. Can you? Here, I'm so happy that you're running. Here's a check for $100. I can't even accept that. I'm not even allowed, and I wouldn't. I would say, no, listen, I can't accept that. It has to actually go through the treasurer. I'm not even allowed to handle the money. So I think rightfully so, there are some restrictions on the ways in which a judge or someone who wants to be judged can try to collect that money, but it's not a perfect system.
Do judges know who gives them donations?
Oh, sure.
Sure.
In fact, we have to list those and file those with the Board of
Okay, then.
Elections. In Cuyahoga County, there's 59 communities. When you're running, you're trying to figure out what's it going to cost to run in the county. I try to get about $125,000, and that depends. For example, I run my last time in 2020. That's going to be a presidential year. There's no way I'll have the money to be able to pay for any TV ads. It'll be so expensive and used up for the presidential election. I'll be a footnote somewhere. But you have to try to generate those kind of funds. Now, you can use your own money. You can get loans. If you have family that have money, it's interesting how far out your family can give you money if they want to. So if you're Donald Trump, you're covered. But I don't have that in my family, so nobody's loaning money. And the obvious question you asked about conflicts, where do you think you get most of the money for an election if you're a judge countywide? It's from the lawyers. I mean, it's that simple. You're accepting money from a variety of lawyers, and it really makes for a difficult situation. Some guy gives me the cap of $650 and some guy gives me $25. Well, I shouldn't even know that, and I certainly should never think of it when they come before me. And that's something you have to just block out. It can't be part of your consideration. Or a guy that gave me $0. There's an old myth about giving guys cases because they gave you money. And I think in my first election, I got back a note card in one of these things for fundraising, and it said, $0, I'm giving you exactly what you gave me in cases. Now, he didn't have enough guts to tell me who it was or the postmark, but I mean, that's really the inherent problem in a system where you're giving money to somebody to run. Unlike the big politicians, we can't take any money from corporations. Now, it's weird, you can take it from an LLC, but you can't take it from a corporation, and we can take it from PACs. But we have caps on how much, like JJ said, each level. The Supreme Court judges can take more than we can at Common Pleas, and I can take more than he can, I think, or maybe we're the same. So there are limitations on how much we can take in terms of fundraising. But and then the question becomes, how do you use your money in the election? What's effective? What gets to people? And that becomes really tricky to know how to do that, especially when you're not a politician by nature. And I don't think you should be a politician by nature if you're on the bench. So that's a conflict as well.
I want to interject on the fundraising point. The lawyers who participate in Judge for Yourself are not permitted to make contributions, whether of time or money, to political candidates. We've had occasionally a situation where somebody's spouse is running. That person sits out all of the interviews relating to all of the candidates in that particular race.
Should election funding be capped? There are donation caps, but as you pointed out, a very wealthy candidate can self-fund a massive election effort and be at an advantage. Do you think there ought to be an overall cap, how much can be spent on any race?
I'd love to have a cap to be on an even playing field. I don't know what that number would be, but I'd be delightful. I mean, there's a candidate and very good judge, but was able to raise something like $400,000, and it's hard to beat that kind of a candidate, no matter who you are, just because of the sheer volume of information they can get out in the community. So I'd be a fan.
Okay. We have a couple of questions about how we could make this
Excuse me, I don't think I'm a fan of that.
Oh, yes?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. Yes,
I
carry
don't
on.
think, I know what you're saying. I toy with this question all the time, and I'm not sure if I'm really convinced that there should be a cap.
Okay, that's fair. Questions about making the elections sort of easier for the voters. One suggestion, maybe we should vote for all judges in the odd or off years where there are sort of fewer candidates on the ballot. Another suggestion, maybe judges should be moved up to the top of the ballot. Which of these suggestions do you think would be useful reforms that would help voters?
Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor actually proposed about 3 or 4 years ago that we move the judicial elections to the state judicial elections to the odd years. In odd years now, we have the municipal elections. Her thought was, and obviously she is very keen on this notion of informed voters and a quality judiciary. Her notion was, let's move all the judicial elections to the off years. I thought, given her leadership, that we might actually see a bill being introduced to that effect, but to my knowledge, that hasn't happened, and I think one of the challenges is an economic one, and that is to have state elections in odd years means that the county board of elections would have to mobilize a larger force to administer the election, and that has its own economic and perhaps political, I don't know, challenges.
Okay, thank you. Okay. What about political party memberships? Do you think, play any role in the selection of judges, since you have a duty to be free from political bias? What role might political party membership play?
When I first ran, you could not say that you were, you run in a Democratic primary or Republican primary, and then you're supposed to say never again what your party is. But now it was Justice O'Neill, who went to the federal court and sued, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And now you can say, I was endorsed by the Democratic Party, I was endorsed by the Republican Party. You can say that. But previous to that, you could not say what political party you were.
Okay.
But you were going to Democratic Ward Club meetings. I mean, so they knew,
In this county, there are more Democratic voters than Republican voters. So those who are running as Republican candidates have a more difficult time. There's also another layer, and that is that the Democratic Party endorses candidates when there are multiple Democrats running for the same position. The party chooses one to endorse. And the party's choice of who to endorse is not something I've been in the room for. So I can only speak as an outsider. But I must say cynically that my impression is that there are political considerations that often guide the endorsement process, not necessarily the same factors that our groups look at when we do ratings.
Out of the 34 general division judges, there are 5 Republicans. So what they said, I think it's 3.2 or 3.4 Democrats for each Republican in the county, although I'm told the independents outnumber both. But there is definitely that issue in this county. You go south of here into Medina and farther south, it skews the other way.
Judge Gibbs, you
On
want
the
to add
bench,
anything?
it shouldn't matter. On the bench, it should not matter.
Do any of you think that on the bench it does matter?
No, it doesn't
No, it shouldn't. I mean, I think all this kind of stuff you see about Supreme Court justices may be a whole different issue. But, there's Democrat judges on our bench that are very conservative, very tough on things. There's Republican judges on our bench that are much more liberal about things. And it doesn't matter. You can't, if you rule because of a party philosophy, you don't belong to being a judge. It's got to come down to the law and the facts in the case. Doesn't matter. I mean, take a hot button issue. Take any of the hot button issues out there right now, whether it's abortion, same-sex marriage, gun control. It doesn't matter what I personally think about that. There's law as Roe versus Wade. That's the law. I don't have any choice in that matter. That's what the Supreme Court has ruled. I've got to follow that law regardless of what my personal feelings may be. And that's true on all the issues. So I was in a parade once in West Park, and a woman asked me what my party was. And I said, well, I'm registered as a Republican. Well, I'll never vote for a Republican. I'm a teacher. I said, gee, I was a teacher and a member of the teachers union. I don't care. I'll never vote for a Republican. I mean, you're just not going to change some people's minds, but it has nothing to do with what you do as a judge. It shouldn't. If it does, you shouldn't be on the bench.
Did you want to add anything to it?
No, I would just, I would echo that for sure. I mean, it is a piece of information that certainly people use, and it may give you some insight, or you may think it may give you some insight, but you have no way of really knowing, right? I mean, and that's the idea, nor should you know. My political beliefs and my political party affiliation may in fact give you some insight on how I view the world, and maybe you can use that as a piece along with everything else. But certainly if you're using that as the only piece, you're likely misinformed.
Okay, thank you. Now, I've gotten a couple questions about Serial and the podcast, for those of you who don't follow podcasts, which unfortunately includes me. But one of the questions is a concern that the loudest, most opinionated voice is the voice that gets heard when we're talking about the judiciary and the functioning of the Cuyahoga County court system. What would you say? Do you have any observations? I don't know if any of you listened to Serial and have some reactions to its portrayal of the court system and what you might respond.
I think whoever asked the questions got great insight. They did. Nobody came in my courtroom, so I guess I must not be saying anything controversial enough or newsworthy to make it to the podcast. But I think they had an agenda. I think they had a message they wanted to send in that, and they picked and chose the people that made those most glaring. I mean, you got 34 personalities on our bench. You can imagine what a range that might be. They were given free access to the court, as they should be in the media, but I think they were able to pick and choose what they thought would be, stick out more with the listening public. And in fact, one of the guys they recorded is outspoken in the courtroom, says sometimes crazy things, but he's actually very gentle with people, doesn't go through with his threats, and they didn't really go through with that to suggest, okay, he may say these outrageous things, but the reality is he's put some more people on probation than a lot of other judges. He doesn't throw people in prison on a regular basis. But if you listen to what he said on the Serial broadcast, you think this is the hanging judge from the Old West. So, I mean, I think it was not terribly fair or a very fair representation of really what goes on a daily basis in the courthouse.
But on the other hand, we had a judge on Cleveland Municipal Court who was really should not have been there and really had some serious problems. And it took a number of years that she's no longer there because it was really unfair to people and to the lawyers, and I mean, staying in court till 8 and 9 and 10 o'clock at night and having people in a holding cell, 8 hours, and just some really bad things. So, I mean, you have to weigh the ability of the public to learn about what goes on in courtrooms sometimes.
Yeah. And I would just echo that. I mean, we have an incredible system of justice in this country. I wouldn't have become a lawyer had I not thought so, and I certainly wouldn't be sitting on the bench had I not thought so. That being said, there are, like everything else, there are flaws, and there are serious flaws in our justice system. And so, from my perspective, I think a series like that, if it sheds some light on that, although maybe just like it's a pendulum, right, and maybe too far, but I think it's also important to shed some light on some of those serious flaws that are inherent in our system, but not flaws, in my opinion, that can't be overcome.
Do you think overall voters trust our judicial system from your experience of talking to voters?
I think on an individual basis, I think I think so, but probably like other things, when they look at the aggregate, my guess would be if you did a poll and you said, do you believe that the level of trust in judges, both at the highest level all the way down, I think if you asked it a general question, it would be lower and lower, and that's unfortunate. I also think my hope would be is that if you asked on an individual basis with anyone with any real knowledge, that they would have trust in the judges that they've been in front of, because I think we do have some great judges in Cuyahoga County.
Okay. Is that the experience of our other panelists as well? That overall, the voters you talk to, do they or do not trust our system?
I would say that most of them do trust. I think you got to remember it's an adversarial system, and half the people lose in every trial. And the guy who loses, well, the judge was unfair to me, or they didn't let me do what I wanted to do in the trial. I mean, it's like anybody, if the Browns lose, well, it was bad reffing. That figures into it as well. But I think generally the people that have had a real experience, especially like people on jury duty. If you talk to the folks who've been on jury duty, I think you'd find a huge percentage would say it was a great experience. I thought the judge did a great job. I thought the parties, the lawyers on both sides did a great job. It was really hard making a decision. So I think the folks who touch the system, it's easy to be skeptical from the outside looking in.
Or people will say, like, well, he only got a year in jail. Well, that was the maximum sentence. So.
Yeah, people often are not happy with your sentences. You gave them too much, you gave them too little. Usually when I get those complaints, I figure I got it right.
Do you think, well, first, to what extent do you allow video and cameras in your courtrooms, and do people watch them?
They used to video, Cleveland Municipal Court, and people would stop me in the supermarket. I saw you on TV and stuff. So I mean, you have the right to come and watch. So you have to, as long as the cameras are not interfering with the, it's just a Shepherd case in Ohio is the landmark case on courtroom cameras. So as long as it's not interfering with the proceedings, and I think people should come and watch. Go down to the courthouse and watch. It's interesting.
The cameras are permitted. Simple, flat out, they're permitted. There's only very, very extreme circumstances that you can close the courtroom from cameras. Witnesses have a right not to be on camera. That's within the jury. That's within the rules. But they have an absolute right to be there, and it's an open proceeding anyhow. What's the difference?
Okay, thank you.
They just can't, they can't interfere with the,
Right.
the proceedings.
Okay.
There is a difference between state and federal court in that regard, because in federal court, you can't have cameras. You can, of course, have reporters, and anybody who wants to come to any court to watch a hearing or a proceeding is welcome to do that. You don't need a ticket. You do have to go through the metal detector, but I think that, and that's the only requirement.
Thank you. I just want to, at this juncture, put in a plug for jury duty, because honestly, people try, they groan, they try to get out of it, but the best way to understand our judicial system, absolutely, is to serve on a jury.
I'll give you one trick on that. We won't let you out of it, but like teachers ask to defer it to the summer when they're on vacation. You can always get it deferred, but we still want you to come down and see us.
Yeah, okay. And then a note came in from the audience. In Cleveland in 2017, the municipal election, they placed the judicial candidates at the top, and people still undervoted for the judicial candidates. So I think to some extent there's a fatigue issue, but also to some extent there's what we're talking about tonight, which is people just don't know. Do you think it's better to have voters vote or for people if they don't know who they are, or is it better for them to refrain?
Well,
a lot of people just don't vote.
The absentee ballot really works because you can sit down. I have people calling me, who should I vote for? And I tell them, you can look at it yourself. You can look at the newspaper. You can ask me. But that gives you some time to think, and you're not rushing into, just voting for the familiar name.
Okay. Any?
Well, I don't know why you'd vote for anybody you don't know. I'd like to
Especially if you pick them by the name.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm happy to get the recipient of those votes, but seriously, I think you wouldn't vote for a congressional candidate you don't know. I don't think. Why would you do it with any other candidate?
Okay. A couple other questions have come in that are not strictly related to judicial elections, but seem to have a groundswell of support for people wanting to know the answer. So. There's a number of questions about bail and the opportunities for bail reform. and concern about people waiting in jail because they cannot afford to pay cash bail. Any reactions you might have would be appreciated.
Well, you have a constitutional right to have a bail, so the question is, are you going to come back, and what is the danger to the community, I guess? And so, the judge has an opportunity to look at your background and, do you have roots in the community? I mean, if you just got here yesterday from California and you have know anybody here and you commit this violent crime, your chances are going to be your bond's going to be higher than someone who's been here and we know you're a stable person. So every time, like Judge McClelland said, every time you set the bond, you're kind of rolling the dice because you really never know. I mean, all the probation officers can do a report and tell you, but the person could go off and do something crazy. But you do have indicia to give you some background to help you make that decision. And consider yourself. I mean, I don't want these people to get bond. Well, maybe it's you. Do you want to sit in jail? And then, we have this horrible problem at the jail. So, you just have to weigh the equities.
I think it is clear to me that there's certainly a move away from the money bond system, and like I said, there are flaws in that system. The question now is, and it's not easy to set. I mean, it's easy to take a sort of, a view from the top and say, oh, we should get rid of these money bonds. But when you're the judge that has to set bond on somebody who's been alleged to have committed an act of domestic violence, it's not easy. I mean, it's difficult. And as the judge mentioned, I don't have a crystal ball, and so I'm doing my best when I set bond. I think part of the what's going to need to happen and is there has to be the funding available and the realities of, especially at the municipal level, but I think is that you have the tools available to monitor people. I think it's been shown that whether it's an electronic monitoring device or to have a probation officer, somebody has to check in with that probation officer. If you have tools like that available to you, if I had tools like that available to me, it would be much easier to give people personal bonds. But the reality of it is like everything else, there's a funding source and there's limited funding available for that stuff. But I think that there's some good research going on and some good discussions going on. I was down in Columbus recently on a pretrial services discussion where there was a giant hall filled with judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, probation officers from different courts all over, having this discussion about with the reality that there's likely going to be this move away from money bonds and the flaws in that system. How should we go about approaching that and trying to be proactive? And so I try to be proactive in what I'm doing. As an example, first thing that I do every morning, what I have happen now in my court is I get a roster of who's in the Cleveland Heights jail. Cleveland Heights is somewhat unique in that it's one of the few jails left in the area that is not run by the county. So Cleveland Heights, the police still run the jail. So I have a roster of everyone who's in that jail, and I pay close attention because just as I don't want someone getting out that may hurt somebody or may never show up again. I also recognize that the likely cases is that person they've entered a not guilty plea, and so they're not guilty in my eyes, right? And so they shouldn't be sitting down there if they don't have to.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so just briefly, we're coming up on the end.
The Common Pleas Court's actively involved in a bail reform analysis. We just had a meeting last week and have hired outside sources to do an analysis. We've had a validated risk assessment tool for years. This Arnold Foundation is the new name you hear all the time. They have a new tool they suggest you use, but their tool doesn't even involve an interview of the defendant. Ours has always had an interview of the defendant. We're at the felony level. So, I mean, people aren't going to get bonds probably on a murder, a serious domestic violence. Drug possessions are often low level, but they concern us greatly with the opioid epidemic. So do I let somebody out knowing over the weekend they could overdose, and that's on me? That's a very difficult decision when you see those kind of cases. We're trying very hard to reduce our jail numbers all the time. We get a weekly report of how many people we have in jail and try to move them out of there. So there's been a desire, and I think there's been a huge movement in reducing the number, and we're going to continue to do that.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful responses to that question. Now we are at the time's up mode. I can tell you, for you, those of you whose questions were not asked, I see that we could do another entire forum on the judiciary, judicial reform, and improvement of the operation of the courts. So thank you for your thoughtful questions, and we will work on that. So on behalf of League of Women Voters, thank you very much.